Right now, somewhere in the world, a person with the best cold weather gear money can buy is in serious trouble. Thermal base layers, Gore-Tex shell, GPS device, emergency beacon. Everything modern survival science has produced, and they are losing. 20,000 years ago, your ancestor faced something worse. Temperatures that would kill exposed skin in minutes. Predators that own the dark. No rescue coming, no beacon to trigger. Nothing between them and the cold but what they knew. They didn't just survive it, they raised children in it. They crossed continents in it. They painted on cave walls and told stories and built the foundations of everything we call human, in conditions that would hospitalize most people alive today within hours. Something they understood about cold has been almost completely forgotten, and the gap between what they knew and what we know may be the most consequential thing we have lost. Here is what they understood. To grasp what your ancestors knew about cold, you first need to understand what cold actually is. Not in the modern sense, an inconvenience managed by thermostats and heated cars, and the assumption that warmth is always one switch away. In the ancient sense, cold as a predator, patient, relentless, and operating on four fronts simultaneously. Your ancestors didn't have the scientific vocabulary for what they understood instinctively and completely, but the knowledge was precise, more precise in many ways than the relationship most people today have with the temperature outside their window. The first front was the ground itself. Sit on frozen earth and the heat drains from your body through direct contact, not slowly, not gently, but with the efficiency of a pipeline running in reverse. Your body produces heat. Cold ground consumes it. The transaction is entirely one-sided and it never stops. Your Ice Age ancestors understood this with the clarity that comes from watching people die. Their first act in any camp was creating separation from the earth. Thick beds of pine boughs, dry leaves, animal skins, layered until the barrier between body and ground was substantial enough to interrupt that transaction. Not for comfort, because the alternative was death from below, even with the upper body warm. A single buffalo robe, properly prepared, contained thousands of individual hairs, each trapping a tiny pocket of warm air. 40 pounds of insulation, portable, tested across thousands of winters. Not guesswork, engineering. The second front was wind. At 40 below, with a 20-mile-per-hour wind, the effective temperature drops to 70 below. At that temperature, exposed skin freezes in minutes. Your ancestors knew this not as a number, but as a physical reality they navigated every day of winter. The solution was not a single layer, but a system. And the critical component was a windproof outer barrier that could flex with movement without surrendering its integrity. Brain-tanned leather, prepared using the animal's own neural tissue mixed with water, produced a material of almost miraculous properties, supple enough to move with the body, dense enough to stop wind without trapping the moisture that would later freeze against the skin. They chose campsites the way a modern engineer selects load-bearing walls, reading the landscape for natural windbreaks, rock outcroppings, stands of dense timber, ravines that would create a pocket of still air in the middle of a moving storm. Every decision was thermal calculation without the vocabulary of thermodynamics. The third front was invisible and relentless. On a clear, cold night, heat radiates from exposed surfaces into the sky continuously, not stolen by wind or ground, but bleeding upward into the cold emptiness above. An uncovered head in these conditions is not an oversight. It is an open drain. Modern research has confirmed what your ancestors knew empirically. Up to 40% of body heat can be lost through an uncovered head in cold conditions. They slept with their heads covered. They plugged every gap in their insulation with the obsessive attention of someone who understood that heat, like water, always moves toward absence. And in winter, absence was everywhere. The fourth front was the one that killed the most people who should have known better. Sweat. Water evaporating from skin carries heat away from the body 25 times faster than air. In cold conditions, sweat is not a sign of healthy exertion. It is the cold's greatest weapon, delivered from inside your own body. Your ancestors solved this with layering, not the modern understanding of layering as simply wearing more clothing, but a dynamic, constantly adjusted system responsive to activity level and changing conditions. Work hard and shed a layer before the sweat builds. Stop moving and add it back immediately. The balance between heat production and heat loss was managed with a precision that had nothing to do with technology and everything to do with knowledge earned across generations of watching people get it wrong. They knew, bone deep, the way you know your own name, that a man who overheated and sweated would pay for it when he stopped, that the moisture would cool and the cooling would accelerate, and that by the time he felt it, the damage was already done. They knew, in other words, what we have almost entirely forgotten, that surviving cold is not about staying warm, it is about managing heat. But clothing and campsite selection were only the surface of what your ancestors understood. Beneath the practical knowledge was something more fundamental, a comprehension of fire that goes far beyond what most people today could articulate. We think of fire as heat. Your ancestors understood fire as a system. The difference is not subtle. It is the difference between knowing that water is wet and knowing how to build an aqueduct. They understood combustion in terms of fuel categories: soft woods that burned hot and fast for ignition, hard woods that produced sustained coals for cooking and overnight warmth, standing dead wood that remained dry through rainfall because its bark shed water from its still vertical position. They read a forest the way we read a fuel gauge, with an immediate, practical understanding of what was available, what it would produce, and how long it would last. They built fire structures engineered for specific purposes. A reflector fire with a wall of rock or packed snow behind it doubled the warmth delivered to a shelter by redirecting heat that would otherwise disperse into the open air. A star fire with logs arranged like spokes fed itself through the night as each log burned toward the center, requiring minimal tending. A pit fire with an air tunnel beneath it burned efficiently in high winds that would extinguish a conventional fire, drawing oxygen from below, shielded from the wind above, invisible from a distance. These were not discovered by accident. They were developed through the accumulated experimentation of thousands of winters, codified into practice and transmitted through generations as carefully as we transmit literacy. And beneath the structural knowledge was the knowledge of ignition, the understanding that reliable fire in wet, cold, impossible conditions was not luck but preparation. Prepared tinder carried dry against the body. Multiple methods maintained simultaneously, because the person who had only one way to make fire was a person whose survival depended on conditions cooperating. Conditions in an Ice Age winter did not cooperate. Your ancestors planned accordingly. There is one piece of their cold weather knowledge that modern culture has not just forgotten, but actively reversed: fat. The human body in extreme cold is a furnace. It burns fuel to maintain core temperature continuously, accelerating that burn as temperatures drop, adding the demands of physical labor on top of the baseline metabolic cost of simply staying warm. In genuine winter conditions, your ancestors regularly needed 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day just to remain functional. The fuel that met that demand was not lean protein, it was fat. They understood something that decades of modern nutritional thinking obscured: that fat is the high-density, slow-burning fuel that the body runs on in cold conditions. Lean meat without fat produces a condition they recognized and named: a paradoxical starvation, where the body expends more energy processing protein than it recovers from it. They called it different things across different cultures. The condition is the same: a man with a full belly dying. They hunted accordingly, not for the largest animal, for the fattest one. A bear in late autumn, body packed with pre-hibernation reserves. A buffalo cow after a summer on rich grass, carrying 6 inches of back fat. Organ meats, bone marrow cracked and consumed at the kill site, beaver tail roasted until the skin split and the dense fat inside was rendered soft. This was not primitive eating. This was precise nutritional understanding, arrived at through the same mechanism that produced every other piece of their cold weather knowledge: observation, consequence, and the accumulated wisdom of generations who had learned what kept people alive. They rendered fat into tallow for storage. They combined dried meat with fat and dried berries into dense, portable, calorie-concentrated provisions that would not spoil and could sustain a person through days of hard travel when nothing else was available. They understood that the body is a system, that warmth from the outside and fuel from the inside were not separate strategies but two halves of the same response to cold. That clothing could only do half the work, that the other half had to come from within. What our ancestors possessed that we have almost entirely lost is not a collection of individual skills. It is a relationship with the physical world, A direct, unmediated understanding of the forces that govern survival, not managed through technology or outsourced to systems we don't understand, but held personally in the hands and the body in the decisions made every day. They were not naive about their situation. They knew exactly what the cold was capable of. They had buried people taken by it, not strangers, but members of their own group, people whose mistakes were visible and legible and remembered. The knowledge they carried was not theoretical, it was written in consequence. We have replaced that knowledge with infrastructure, central heating, insulated buildings, supply chains that deliver fuel without us understanding what fuel does. And the infrastructure works until it doesn't. Until the power goes out, or the supply chain breaks, or the heated car is suddenly not available, and a person who has never developed a direct relationship with cold is standing in it. Your ancestors were not stronger than you. They were not a different species or a different intelligence. They were biologically identical to the person reading this now. What they had was knowledge that was tested every winter and refined over hundreds of thousands of years of getting it wrong and passing forward what worked. That knowledge is not gone. It is dormant, and the cold, when it comes, does not care which century you were born in. If this is the kind of story you want to go deeper on, the real knowledge your ancestors carried and what happened when we forgot it, you are in the right place. This is Ancestor Tactics. Every episode goes further into what ancient humans actually understood and what modern life has quietly cost us. Subscribe and stay with us, because next time we are going back further, to a period so cold it makes everything we have covered today look like autumn, and to the people who not only survived it, but used it to become us. Your ancestors didn't survive by accident, neither will you.